Talk 100.3.
Welcome back to Talk Sport and Business. I'm Neil Oja. Joining me is Pranav Prasanna on Talk 100.3. There has been a constant chatter about something that very few people like me, in fact, I'm one of those guys who has this as a massive grey area of understanding from learnings of, through schoolings or the years that I've studied at the uni. This has always been a grey area for me, and that is taxation.
Right.
Have you understood taxes like at the back of your hand, Pranav? Or you are someone who probably will be wanting to do a crash course on this?
Neil, I'll tell you this. You talk about being in the grey about taxes. I'm in the absolute dark about taxes. I'm 22 years old and I've lived and loved sport and entertainment all my life. So if you're asking me what taxes are, I'm not the best person, but we do have a guest in our studios who's the best person. And Neil, I will leave this to you.
That's right. We've got Mr. Amit Sachdev joining us today in the studios. He's a CEO Corporate Tax at the MBG Corporate Services. MBG is a professional services and consulting firm. Welcome to the show, Mr. Sachdev.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you, and it's my pleasure to be here on this station today.
Well, I mean, there has been a lot of chatter, and as we speak, about corporate taxes being introduced in the UAE. Now, one wonders, what is this? How does it impact? But all of those questions later. First question, what is corporate tax and when will it start coming through in the UAE?
Oh yeah, sure. That's a very important question. So corporate tax in UAE would come into force from 1st of June 2023.
Okay.
Essentially, it means anyone doing business in UAE would be liable to pay corporate tax. And the rate of corporate tax which is announced here is 9%, and which is, to be honest to you, the lowest in the entire GCC region.
Okay. So when you say 9% and it'll be applied to anyone who's doing a business. So does it finally percolate down to the common man that if I'm doing a business of selling goods and if 9% is what I pay the government as taxes, will that 9% be eventually loaded down to the common man, the common consumer?
Well, you see, the corporate tax is a tax on profit.
Okay.
So it is not a transactional tax, but it depends, you see, how businesses, evolve their decisions and how they plan, because loading this tax would mean an increase in price for people. So probably how businesses evolve themselves, prepare themselves would be something which only time will be able to answer this question.
You spoke about businesses, and we look at UAE being such a diverse country in terms of demographics, and even when you talk about businesses, the kind of businesses, when we see foreign companies that are looking to do business here or invest, will they also be, does these taxes also apply to them?
Yes, actually foreign companies I would classify in two areas. One, those who are having offices here already in form of an entity, could be a LLC company, could be a zone entity or whatsoever. So those would also be liable for tax on the 9% of their accounting profit. But let us look at those foreign companies who operate outside UAE with probably a person stationed here, like your radio channel and a broadcaster sitting. So such eventualities would also be very, very important to analyze. People working for them here in UAE would constitute some kind of an agent for a foreign company, and this agency network can also bring them into a tax net.
Interesting. I mean, so there are so many layers to, taxation that we definitely as a common man need to be aware of, understand, even if it's not directly impacting us. But then for the organizations, and I'm sure that, a lot of people who are listening to us either are at the decision-making level in an organization or are in the accounting phase of an organization. If an organization has their accounting period from, say, a calendar year, so they start their accounting from January to December. When the accounting starts, when the taxation starts from June, will they have to go in from like a half year cycle, or will they have to wait for a complete cycle?
That's a good question, but it is not how the law is being looked at. So law would be in force from 1st of June 23, but companies who are following calendar year, say someone follows January 24 to December 24, for such a business, the requirement would be to pay taxes in 9 months after end of December 24. So for them, the first return falls due on September 25. So you don't have to do any mid-year accounting or break your accounting into two different periods to follow your tax calendar. So for you, the law will come into force from January 24. That will be your first tax period, and the first compliance would fall due in September 25. And when I say you September 25, that's the last timeline, but the law permits you to do it in 9 months period.
You mentioned about that gap, which, about the payments in September, just makes me think, would the payment be allowed to be done in installments for corporate taxes? Is that a way for businesses to look at it as well?
No, unlike many other countries, here the concept is not pay as you earn. The concept here is after you have earned, you should pay taxes. So they don't ask you to make any provisional payments. They don't ask you to follow any provision filings. Instead, they allow you to make payment in one go and make one tax return after this 9 months period. That's the key important point.
Wow. So, I mean, you made a very valid point over here that there's no advance payment for the organization, that they have to deposit a certain amount and then operate.
Right.
You make your profits, you do your bookkeeping, and whatever profits you have accrued, after that, put in 9% as the corporate tax to the government.
Yes.
That's a fantastic point that you make. And, it's important for everyone who's listening to be aware of this as well.
That what makes me say that here the compliance is not going to be very difficult, unlike other countries, since I have an experience working in very mature tax jurisdictions. So to me, the compliance seems quite easy here in this country, and I would... I believe that that's a very commendable effort by UAE government by allowing ease of compliance for businesses here in UAE.
You mentioned that compliance will be easy now. I have a question with regards to that. What makes it tougher for businesses to go about taxation or corporate when it comes to corporate taxes in the countries that you mentioned? Can you mention some places where it would comparatively be hard?
Yeah, for example, I come from India. So I have been practicing tax in India for now almost 2 decades. I have also worked in mature tax jurisdictions like Japan, like UK, Singapore. All there in these regions, the way taxes are interpreted, the way transactions are being planned, and the way these are structured in itself brings a lot of ambiguity in transactions, and which makes compliance, bringing certainty to transactions in itself a very challenging proposition. But unlike UAE, I have read the blueprint of the law. I find it relatively quite simple. And again, I think the intent is very clear. They don't want to disturb any attractiveness about business in UAE. They want UAE to remain as an attractive business foreign investment destination center.
Brilliant. I mean, this is definitely a very good sign for businesses who want to actually set up even now, or probably, if you're a startup and if you're thinking that, okay, so there's going to be a corporate tax that's going to be involved. So does a startup or say a free zone company or a charitable organization, now these are different variations of businesses, or you may call so, would all of them fall under the same purview of corporate tax?
I will go one by one. Let us first deal with charitable and public utilities entities. Charitable entities are not required to pay any tax in this UAE. And the only condition is that they'll have to take approval from Ministry of Finance.
Fair.
And once they have got that approval, they will not be taxable, because per se they are not in profit-making activities. They believe in charities, and that's the purpose for which they exist. So they are exempted entities.
Right.
Now let me deal with free zones. Free zones, the intent is very clear. They don't want to put any tax on a free zone entity, because that will go against the concept of free zones and the concessions being given by UAE for free zones. But there are certain important aspects. Anyone who operates in free zone, makes a transaction with the same free zone entity or different free zone entity, they are not supposed to pay any tax here. But once they have any transactions with mainland, that can bring them certain tax exposures. So now it will be very important for mainland entities and free zone entities as to how do they structure and plan their operations. Things seem to be clear in the blueprint of the law, but again, once we have final legislation coming, maybe there will be a lot more clarity in terms of how the transactions have to be planned.
And does the corporate tax also come in for freelancers? as individuals?
Not really. The law here says that any individual earning salary, rent kind of incomes, they are exempted from tax.
Right.
The only difference is any individual who runs a commercial or a business activity.
Okay.
And he's having a commercial license, then he is liable to pay tax.
Right. But then again, there would be some limits to the profits that you make, or it's for
Yes.
everyone?
No, it's not for everyone. There's an annual threshold of 375,000 dirhams. If you have income equal to or less than this amount, you are not supposed to pay tax. So it will be a 0% tax regime for you. But anyone who has income in excess of this threshold, on the excess you have to pay 9%.
Okay.
So it's a progressive taxation.
Right.
Well, you mentioned to have seen the blueprint of the taxation system here. Now, having seen that, having analyzed that, any 3 key areas that you would suggest businesses to start
Yes.
planning from now?
Yeah, I think area number 1 would be that businesses should read this law very properly and probably plan out as to how they wish to restructure the business and use this time, a full 1 year, for their readiness journey. That is one important area. Secondly, the blueprint mentions that whatever we disclose and file in tax returns would have to be evidenced and substantiated by documentary records at a later date. So FTA would have a right to look at it. So my suggestion to all businesses would be that they should retain proper accounts. They should keep proper records of every transaction they do, so that they are not in a compromising, difficult position when they are questioned by FTA. And third, of course, is it is important to be in compliance with law, and we should take it seriously, and we should timely manage all our compliances.
Brilliant. I mean, I think, what this conversation has not just enlightened us, but given us a very clear understanding of how the corporate taxes will be, come into play within the UAE, and, how it is going to be a progressive tax, as you mentioned.
Yes.
And, for organizations also, there are some very simple basic steps that you mentioned that they have to follow to ensure that, for them, it becomes a simplified process versus, falling into the trouble of, oh my God, I have to pay taxes now.
Yes. So again, a very commendable step here. They are allowing you full 1 year for getting prepared and aligned with corporate tax. That's the best part.
Right.
It's not something which is coming up instantly. Rather, they are giving you a blueprint. They are asking businesses to comment and give the feedback, and probably government looks at those feedbacks and align the law, and then before it's put into force, still you have full 1 year to align yourself.
Now, I have this one very simple basic question, and this is pertaining to, say, someone like me, like I mentioned, at the starting of our conversation, that I've studied science. So for me, taxes, finances, all of these things are absolute grey. And Pranav, who's just 22, for him, he's never paid tax. He's born and raised here.
I've never seen papers of a tax return. That's how. When Neil is talking about how I have no idea, that's what I mean.
So for us, people like us, and I'm sure that there are so many people like us who probably, have a chartered accountant who's taking care of their taxes or whatever. How do we educate ourselves? Is there some way, probably some online course or something that, or probably, if you could probably take a little class for us, how do we learn taxations? I mean, they are an important part of life.
I guess the way of learning could be only to catch up as to how many events are being organized and probably spare some time to read it. And trust me, the law here is very simple to read and understand. So even a layman like you who has never got any familiarity with taxes, regardless of your age, experience, I'm sure the law here is quite simpler, and it will not be a very complicated exercise for anyone here.
Well, I mean, he's the way you say it, Mr. Sachdev, it definitely makes us feel that, oh yeah, we'll be able to sail through it. But I'm sure the language, the way things are put in, it will take us maybe more than just a very simplified reading, isn't it?
It'll take us more than a year for sure.
Well,
the terminologies.
I tell you, within if I'm able to take it within a year, I'll be super proud of myself.
Well,
yeah. Sir, you think we should be able to grasp it within a year's time?
I think you should be able to do it much lesser than that.